sound so we can be respectful of your time.
No, he's right up here.
Everybody can see that okay?
There, so you can hear better?
Yeah, you're welcome to come close anytime if you'd like. We won't bite.
Where's the battery? Were you able to hear Mike yesterday?
Have the mic?
No.
Yeah.
I almost told him he'd make a break down throat.
Yeah. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. We got two that moved up to the first row. You get a prize. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming this morning. My name is Jeff Lambert. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Ventura. And this is really a partnership between the city and Community Memorial Hospital. So I'm going to ask Adam Knell from the hospital administration to maybe say some welcoming words on behalf of CMH, and then we'll get going with the presentation.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Well, welcome to each of you. I think we've had a chance to meet a number of individuals. We have both some of the business owners as well as property owners right through this area, and may even have a couple more that are joining us. But we appreciate you coming out. We want to do, and I think as we've tried to do this throughout the project with the new hospital, is to make sure that we're able to share what's going on and be very transparent about some of the things that are taking place, where we stand with the construction, and most currently what we're working on of a parking structure that we're working with the city just out here on the surface lot that is right behind us. So I think our focus today is really to spend some time talking about the parking structure. Just as a quick overview, what we are working on with the hospital is probably a completion date the end of 2015. So it's about a year, a little under a year and a half out of completing the construction. And then our goal is to move into the new hospital in 2016, so the first quarter of 2016. Crossing our fingers if everything goes as planned with construction, which we all know it doesn't necessarily do that. But that is the target right now that we're working towards. And so we appreciate the flexibility. I know that many of the business owners have talked about some of the impact and also the potential impact of the parking structure and what the game plan is there. But wanted to give you a quick overview before we kind of turn it back to Jeff and to Brian to spend some time discussing the parking structure, what that means, what that looks like, how we've gone through the process, and some of the next steps there. So Jeff and Nick, we'll be here through the whole time, and would invite some questions, kind of a Q&A towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a sense of where we are in the time frame too, from the parking structure approval process. And as Adam said, this is city property. As all of you probably don't know, it's within the sort of the city's parking district that was created many decades ago. The CMH came to the city, and we partnered with them to come up with this concept of we would then lease that property to CMH. CMH would build a structure, and Brian Pendleton on my staff, who's the project manager, will walk you through the details. But as far as timing, just so you know, we had presented this to City Council sort of in a preliminary way in early August, but we didn't ask Council to approve anything. We continued it to September 15th, which is this coming Monday, but we're not going to act on the 15th either. We're going to ask the Council to move this to October 13th. So we don't want to rush this. We want to make sure you have time to absorb what we're telling you today and ask us questions. So our plan at the moment is this will go to Council on October 13th. And the Council will be looking at 3 documents. One will be a memorandum of understanding, which is sort of the deal points between the city and CMH. We already have an MOU in place that was in place when we approved the hospital 4 years ago. That talks about new roadways and property switches, and that's all in place. We're actually amending that to reflect the parking structure happening sooner than we had expected at the time. We also have a lease agreement between the city and CMH for them to lease that property, and that's where all the terms of the agreement will mostly be. We also, as you might know, or maybe you don't know, the existing parking structure is also on city property. That existing structure was built in a similar way, where CMH built the structure on our property, and we have an ongoing lease for that property. That structure was built in 2 phases. At this point, we're proposing, and CMH is proposing to build it all at once. You can imagine the complexities of building the structure and adding onto it later, and the uncertainty of building code changes, so we're going to try to build it all at once. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian. He's going to walk you through. We have some images of what the structure would look like, so you can visualize that, and then walk you through the deal points that we're negotiating with CMH, and then we'll open up to questions, if that's okay with you. Great, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you so much, and again, we're shooting for an hour, again, to be respectful of your time, but we'll definitely have time for questions, and again, some of the imagery of what the parking structure is currently designed to look like, as well as some of the deal points of the different documents that Jeff just mentioned. So moving right into it, again, there was a memorandum of understanding, MOU for short, that was approved in 2010. That MOU at that time contemplated the new hospital that is under construction today, the parking structure, but in a later phase, and public improvements, and Jeff alluded to that, some of the different street improvements and different things that need to happen to make all of this happen. So, as indicated, CMH has come forward. The MOU does talk about a parking structure, and they have come forward to propose a 5.5-story parking structure with 571 parking spaces in total. Within that parking structure would be approximately 1,400 square foot retail liner building, and by that we mean commercial space that would be leasable. And again, this is within the city's surface parking lot that is right out here. And their current price tag of CMH's investment in parking structure is about $11 to $12 million. So in terms of what this parking would do with the 571 spaces, it would be for the new inpatient hospital building that's under construction. It would also be for reuse of the existing hospital building that's there today. And then replacement of 172 parking spaces that are public parking spaces within what's known as parking district number 3. And also something that we're going to talk a little bit more about this morning, which is the concept of a wellness district in the area. And this parking structure would also set aside parking for wellness district spaces. And again,
Can I just jump in on that? I think it's important to I talked with a couple of you. I think we all should acknowledge that up until a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6, 7 years ago, CMH really had options of where they would build their new hospital. And this wasn't the only option on the table. One of them could have been to go someplace else. And because CMH made the decision to replace the hospital here and stay on this campus and invest a few $100 million here, we, the city, want to take advantage of that investment and sort of capitalize on it. And so we can see other investment happen around the hospital. That's why we've used the term wellness district. That there's an opportunity with that kind of investment to see other investment happen that will actually kind of uplift this entire part of our community. And it's not just CMH. BCMC down the street is building their new hospital as well at a $200-something million cost. So those are pretty significant improvements happening in this area, and we want to really see how we can take advantage and capitalize on it. Okay.
So we wanted to again show location. So right now where it says Future Street, that is going to become Cabrillo Drive. Cabrillo Drive is going to shift, and I don't have a pointer, so I'm going to walk up here. So here we go. Here's Main Street. Adam,
We're sitting in the building where the street comes right through.
Yeah, so
this
we're right
two-story
here.
building.
We're right here. So the new street, Cabrillo, will come through right here. The area in red then is the location for the proposed parking structure. So basically, right behind the alley, of course, the alley stays, and right at the edge there of the surface parking lot, all the way to what used to be Glen Street, and then all the way down to Brent, except for that corner building that's down there. So that's the physical location for the parking structure. And I'm going to walk you through. Go ahead, please.
And I'm sorry, Brian.
No, go ahead.
Jeff and I are interrupting you.
No, that's good.
Just to underscore, part of this vision, excuse me, actually came out, and many of you were here in the charrette process. So this dates back, what, I think 5+ years, when we actually held a charrette in this room. And we originally, what we had done is gone to the city and said, here's what we'd like to do, we'd like to build a hospital. And I do believe in the city's wisdom, they said, that's good, however, we need to partner together with the community and figure out how it best fits in there. So rather than, as Jeff points out, a greenfield site that we were actually looking at over in East Ventura area, we felt that it would create kind of an implosion in this area, and we didn't think it was the right thing to do in the long term. So partnering together, we put on that charrette over the course of 2 weeks and came out with this plan. And you don't see the plan of the new hospital here, but essentially the streets, as Brian's pointing out, is to improve some of the, to simplify the overall throughput of some of the traffic and create hopefully more pedestrian traffic as well in this area. So it creates kind of a safer zone in that wellness concept. So just to highlight, why would we be taking down a 2-story building, perfectly good building right here? And the answer is, well, because it makes sense in helping us improve the overall traffic flow and simplify it and allow for pedestrians to hopefully get more engaged in the actual buildings, liner buildings, redevelopment that takes place. So,
Yeah, and I guess also pointing out, obviously here's the current parking structure here in the current power there. So I'm going to walk through a couple of photos that the architect had prepared, and really the way I tried to orient them is as if we're coming in off of Main Street. So as you start to see the images, what I'm going to do is sort of take us around the site in the way that I've laid these out hopefully. So we'll see how that goes. So this is the first image here, and this is, again, what would be Cabrillo coming in. I mentioned the commercial or retail liner building, that would be right in here. Parking structure here. This going across here is the alleyway that ends over Brent. So, like I said, I'm going to keep sort of going around the building as we go here. Okay, so this gives us a little bit broader view. This is a open, basically park area that's in the center, right in front of the hospital building. This gives you a little bit more image. This still is that same alleyway. This is the commercial area here, elevator tower, and parking on that area. We're going to come around. Okay, so this is now, we're a little bit further. There's our same elevator tower, commercial retail in the front here, and now starting to come around the side. This is fully on that side. There is, I should have mentioned, there's 2 points of entrance and exit from the 2 main buildings from the parking structure. The first was off of the alley right here. There's some right over here. And then the second would be off of Brent. And so as we start to come around, there is a entrance exit right here that exits Brent. I think I have a closer picture of that as well. Let's see. Okay, so again, coming further around, this is that where that car is there. This would be Brent, and that would be the entrance exit at that point. And now this is coming almost all the way around where we're now back. This is the alley right here, but we're looking at it from Brent Street. And so that secondary or primary entrance one that I mentioned would be down at that end, which was from the first picture. I think I'm going to go back to that. Let me see if I have one more shot here. This is really to look at it from the 5 Points corner and looking at how it relates to existing buildings in front of it today. I'm going to go back to that first photo just so you can see where that primary entry point is. You can see it there actually. So coming up, the new Cabrillo, and then that would be the entry point right there, right behind the commercial space that would be part of the parking structure. And you can see it there as well, same thing where the parking lane sign is there. So those are some of the photos and renderings of it. In terms of some of the business terms, and Jeff alluded to this, we have an existing parking structure that was built by CMH on city-owned land, so there is a prior agreement for that having been done that is kind of the basis for starting point for us for this one. So proposed ground lease for this parking lot, this surface parking lot right now. The city would not be selling the land, it would be ground leasing it to CMH. And the structure itself, again, 100% of the cost would be borne by CMH. They will own the physical improvements as long as they have a lease with the city. As I say there, they'll pay all of the development costs, currently estimated at 11 to 12 million. That also means ongoing maintenance costs. So for the life of the asset, the life of the parking structure, their obligation will be to maintain its physical improvements. So I mentioned 571 parking stalls. I want to break that out into some different numbers for you. The analysis that was done is that there are 172 parking spaces that need to be replaced that are public parking spaces today, and this parking structure will replace every one of those public parking spaces. That's first. Second, CMH again is taking on 100% of the cost of this. They will have 200 spaces that are dedicated for patients and visitors and staff and so on. And then thirdly, 199 spaces for, and Jeff just talked about this in greater detail, a wellness district parking, and I've got a map I want to show you in a little bit as well. But the idea with these 199, and some more details to follow, would be to provide a mechanism to allow for additional off-site parking for property owners, predominantly along Main Street. And again, I've got a map I'll show you. So just additional details, that 199 that I said there, at CMH's discretion, if it turns out over time that they don't need all 200 of the parking spaces dedicated for CMH purposes, I'm going to flip back, they would have the option to increase it from 199 to 300. Again, as proposed, that would be at their option as it stands today. So annual rent to the city is $10. We're looking at the fact that they're putting in 100% of the investment cost to build it on the city land, and the economic development benefit of CMH's investment in the district as a whole. So public parking. The plan for the public parking is that it will continue to be free public parking. There is no plan for paid parking. We have indicated that any future plan that the city did have for any paid parking would have to go to city council in a public meeting, and we would have what would be operational plan requirements that we would have to bring back to CMH for their review and approval. So I think the point here is that parking today, public parking today, is free. It will continue to be free. There is not a plan for paid parking. If the city does want to pursue paid parking in the future, we would have to have a public meeting with city council, and we'd have to develop an operational plan of how that's going to work and get CMH's approval for that.
Do you know if that's going to be 2-hour parking or will it be unlimited?
It is current. Do we know today what it is?
4 hour now, right? 4 hour in the block today.
There's 4 hours
Yeah.
sign on this side.
Yeah.
I'll say it has been 4 hours historically, and I think that during some of the construction, it hasn't been enforced as much, but whatever the city determines, however,
Yeah.
I don't know if we have a specific number on that.
Yeah, but we can talk to our parking staff about that.
Well, we just need to know for our employees who
Sure.
are working 8-9 hours, you know, that they're out there getting tickets every day.
Right, okay.
Is there any designated location within the structure for public parking?
They will be identified as being public parking, yes. So I think the goal would be that, you know, if you're pulling into that parking structure, you're going to know that it is public parking. It will be indicated that it's public parking. In areas that the CMH chooses to make private, I'm sure it will be indicated as such, and there may be a gate or something at some point, some operational controls. similar to what they have in the current parking structure. Right now, you've got public parking on the lower level, and as you go further up, I think you come up to a gate. It's employee parking. Right?
But I'll say, as of right now, that isn't something that we plan to have a gate. And over time, I mean, we do think that this will be ample parking and growing in this community into what the need is. So I don't foresee it being an early issue. I do think that it may be more of an issue longer term, that we would probably have the potential for gating.
Yeah, but the expectation is the public parking would be very clearly marked. Yeah, so it would be clear to anybody driving in where that space, those
Well,
spaces are.
personally, our concern is that we own the property down here, the retail end of it. And any designated parking within the structure that would be on a higher level is not conducive to retail shopping.
The public parking would be the most convenient spaces, it would be the lower spaces in the
It's,
structure.
I think that what we've done, and anybody that would like to go over and see the other parking structure, albeit it's decades old, but public parking is on the ground level, right near that first ramp up. I'm sure we would follow that similar template. And knowing that initially we're not even planning to have a gate, it allows for parking to take place anywhere that would be convenient in the structure.
Thank you, good question, thank you. So again, talking about the wellness district, there had been, the Urban Land Institute had come out, worked with the city, with CMH, other partners, and did what was called a technical assistance panel in evaluating and talking about how to build on the investment of both of the hospitals, and came up with really the terminology of the wellness district. I just pulled this one-liner from that report, which was a holistic environment of healthy lifestyle and economic opportunities. What the parking structure is intended to do is provide, as I said, additional parking, 199 spaces for properties predominantly on Main Street. As I mentioned, I have a map and there's another slide or two. The goal of this would be to encourage new development on these eligible development parcels. This would be for projects that went through the city process for, let's say, additional square footage on the property, where today maybe there is no room for parking. So maybe your property does not have any room for additional parking on it. The opportunity here is that there would be additional parking in the parking structure that you could sublease from CMH as a way to provide parking that needs to be provided in order to build additional space. Now, this would only be if you had a project that was approved by the city, was quote entitled project by the city, and further that as part of that entitlement, the city entered into an off-site parking agreement as part of that approval of that project. If that occurred, then there would be the ability to work directly with CMH to talk about a sublease of a number of spaces in the parking structure. Again, that total number is 199 that I mentioned earlier. So let's see if the map is next. The map is next. Okay, so we've identified these properties, and in essence what we've done is we've looked at what is it like a block, it's a triangle, but we've looked at the area that is on the same block as the hospital in terms of identifying properties that would be eligible to be considered for this additional parking. And so every one of those properties is you or your neighbor and the information that went out regarding this meeting. And this covers everybody except for the existing hospital building itself. Wherever there was another private parcel, we picked that up in this map here. There were one or two that actually CMH owned that because of the road extensions either went away or partially went away. So that's what this map is here of eligible development parcels. And I'm sure there's going to be questions on that, but I'm going to finish through this. Existing parking structure, we touched on that. City land, CMH paid for and owned parking structure. The existing lease is going to be amended. It will identify that there are 113 public parking spaces in that parking structure. There will be flexibility in location and numbers. That goes a little bit to your question. There will be some flexibility there, but there won't be a loss within the parking district itself. Also, CMH will assume all costs related to ongoing maintenance, and the rent will be the same, $10 annually to the city. Same thing in terms of public parking. Public parking is free. There is no plan for paid parking. This is the same bullet from before. Any future plan would require city council, public meetings, and prior approval of plan by CMH.
Right, I interject.
Yes.
It's also the hospitals in town not having any paid parking, just so that there's clarity around that. It is not our desire in the near future. We can't foresee when we would want to have paid parking. So I just want to make sure that we put that one out there too.
Schedule, both Adam and Jeff touched on this, documents coming forward to city council. So we talked about what that MOU was. It laid out the development of the new hospital, the parking structure, and public improvements. In order for the parking structure to be built in what's called phase 1 instead of phase 2, the MOU is being amended. The lease for the existing parking structure will be amended. A brand new lease will be put in place for the new parking structure, and there is an environmental review component that has to be approved by city council as part of this as well. So estimates construction start first quarter of 2015. Construction period roughly 10 months. Again, we know how construction goes, but that's typically what it would take from start to finish once everything else is out of the way and ready to go. So that is the formal presentation. I'm sure you have questions and we want to take those. And
Yes, I wanted to just highlight one of the things that Brian said is we've invited you, you're all property owners in this area, and that's why you're here today. And we want to just reiterate that we designed this with at least 199 extra spaces that can be used for adjacent property that wants to sort of reinvest and expand your footprint or your square footage. The concept here is if you came in tomorrow and said, I want to take my one-story building and make a three-story building, and my parking requirement is 23 spaces, whatever it is, the city approval of your project would require, right now, you're required to provide all your parking on site. And so in order to provide it off-site, the city approval would require us to also approve an off-site parking agreement that would allow you to provide spaces off-site. Assuming that you got the city approval in place with that allowance for off-site parking, then you go to CMH to enter into the lease for the spaces in their structure. We've also tried to frame the cost of those spaces that's based on the per space cost of construction and the per space cost of annual maintenance. So there's parameters in there about what those costs for those spaces would be. It's not an open-ended negotiation. There are some parameters that we've built in. So I just wanted to reiterate that part. But I think Adam, Brian are here to answer any questions you have. And if we don't have an answer, we'll get back to you before October 13th.
The current parking structure is really at capacity just about every day until about 5 or 6 o'clock at night. Do you anticipate that there will be some relief from that structure once the new structure is built?
Yeah.
In other words,
Yeah, two answers to that. First answer, truthfully, is I don't know. But I can speculate if that's okay. And you don't hold me to speculation, but I can tell you what I would anticipate. Our employees, we are going to ask to remain parking in that parking structure, even with the new hospital being built. So the intent is not to fill up this front new parking structure with employees. There are some physicians that park in a physician lot. They'll be encouraged to still use that lot. There may be some physicians parking in the new lot, but employees largely will still park in that back lot. Where I do think that there will be relief is that current parking congestion, as it is in this area, fills up that valet space and kind of fills up that ramp early on because people say at 7:30 in the morning, I can park there. Some employees, we try to monitor that, but even others, I think that there will be some relief of physician offices. I know Kaiser has an office over on the corner of Loma Vista and Main Street. Some of their individuals parking that lot. There are individuals that work across the street that park in that lot. That will somewhat be relieved because there will be this additional parking structure. So my guess, and again, it's just a guess, but employees will still park over there, but employees are gonna park, continue to park above the gate. The 2 or 1.5 stories that is open should have some relief because it will spread out some of the parking. Additionally, what we're looking at doing is trying to increase some of our valet. Roger Garlick, who's our Director of Engineering, right back here, has been working with the valet service to see if we could expand that, but move it upstairs, so it really takes some of that relief down off of that first level and opens up our public.
We've been here for over 30 years, and one thing that we've noticed is no matter what anybody says, a lot of employees park, it's kind of a path of least resistance. They'll just go wherever they find a spot, and it really chokes us as business owners. Is there any way we can get like a sticker that is mandatory for all CMH employees to have on their car, so we can identify if they're parking in the wrong area? I mean, they park in our Yolanda's parking lot all the time. Not so much now, but
Yeah.
this has been an ongoing thing for
But
years and years.
historically, they were in that triangular piece too.
And again, it's a path of least resistance.
Yeah.
They're gonna park wherever it's simple, and then we lose a spot all day long.
I think it's a great idea, and I know it's something that we've talked about more recently as we've been trying to push all of the employees back into that lot. So it is one that we'll definitely take under consideration and maybe even be able to implement the project. That's something.
Before I forget, I also, if some of you didn't come in early enough, we have a sign-in sheet. It'd be great if we had your information. Maybe we can just pass it around.
Yeah, we can do that.
We can send you all a link to the material that went to council in August, just so you have background information. We can send you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, so you have this information. And then we can send you a reminder of when the council's gonna hear this on October 13th, so you're reminded of that. So if you let us know, we'll keep you in the loop.
The piece I'll also add too, and our original intent was to try to allow valet parking downstairs, but valet parking for anybody, not just the hospital. 99-cent store, there's an alteration shop, Yolanda's. I don't know honestly if it's been used as heavily by others throughout the day, other than individuals within the hospital. I will be truthful, and I think it's one that our hope would be to make that more accessible from a kind of easy in and easy out on an ongoing basis. So that's where we're going back reevaluating, has it's really done what we thought it would, and maybe there's a different place to put that valet parking.
Can I just,
Valet entrance is around the corner.
It is.
It's not right by our back doors and retail.
Right.
And it's pretty well useless to us during the daytime because the whole bottom's full.
Right.
And then at night, they used to leave the barricades up anyway, and we just had to remove them because they wouldn't.
But where it says public parking is still barricaded.
Well, yeah, it's barricaded there.
They
yeah.
have removed it after 5 o'clock, so that it's open for any of that parking.
But you're saying it doesn't all get removed?
But again, a great point, because it's one that we've tried to figure, how could we better utilize that valet service, and maybe it's actually positioning somebody out on that side that would allow for Quest is no longer there, but all of the different properties that are there.
I also want to just, I know, before you bring up the bulb outs, I figure I should bring up the bulb outs. I know at Orchard and Maine, when we reconstructed that intersection, we created these bulb outs that make those turning movements a little challenging. And I think what's happening, I think Yolanda's might feel it more than others, is people are avoiding that intersection because the movements are a challenge, and they're maybe driving through the back more than they otherwise would, because that's a tough intersection given that design. We are reevaluating that. We realize that we pushed those out too far into the street. We've impacted the movements more than we should have. We've gotten, believe me, lots of complaints about those bulb outs. So we are, as we create additional streets, as we create the new Cabrillo and stuff, we're looking at making that a lot better so that we don't create that sort of impact that we created in Orchard. We haven't designed it yet, but we're working on it.
And can I comment really quick on something Jeff just mentioned is, so again, in our spirit of trying to be fully transparent, not only is there construction going on at the hospital, but the vision would be to have construction going on at this parking structure and some of the infrastructure work, meaning the streets and the sidewalks and all of the different lines that have to be connected in there. So just again, over the next year, it will have a lot of construction going on, not just from the hospital but the parking structure and even some of the alleyways, streets, everything that has to take place through there. So I just wanted to be very open about that, and it will get better, but it will probably get worse before it gets better. in reality.
Two things, as we both own small businesses right here. Going back to the little parking stickers, which you had suggested, we find a lot of the doctor's offices, and as I spoke with you a little earlier, that the hospital people that park 8 hours, boom, right there in front or right here in front, all day long. Our clients come in for an hour, hour and a half, they're gone. We have clients that circle for 15 minutes looking for something. That little sticker, if they came and parked right in the back up against the wall, they're here at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and parked up against the back would be a wonderful release where our clients come and go every hour, hour and a half. It alleviates that problem for our clients, and we would know that they're in the wrong because your little meter guy, your little guy would say, you need to be back against the wall where you're supposed to be parking. I've gone over and politely asked, and they go, why? We're here at 7:30, we can park wherever we want. That's wrong. That's A. And two, if you're going to, and you are, going to tear out our parking, are you going to then temporarily for a year or two make parking this way rather than parallel on Main Street to help give us a little more parking for our small little businesses that come in for an hour, hour and a half? Are you gonna help us that way? Because you're killing us, little business.
Yeah, I realize the construction is difficult. I will tell you, I doubt very much we're gonna put angle parking in that block of Main Street, because right now, we need the lanes, the only way to do angle parking is to eliminate a lane in each direction, and we don't have, there's enough traffic that we cannot eliminate a lane. The long-term plan for Main Street is to put angle parking sort of like we have downtown, and have 2 lanes of traffic. Right now, the traffic is enough that we can't eliminate a lane. I don't see it happening in the short term, but in the long term, it is something we want to get into.
But how do we have parking? If you're taking everything away, and we don't have parking now, what do we do in 10 months you killed us?
One of the requirements that we have on CNH, just like with their current construction, is that they have a construction management plan. How are they gonna deal with parking during construction when they take all these spaces out? And that's something we're working on today, so that before they start construction, we've come together to figure out how to minimize those kind of impacts. I don't think we have all the answers today, but
We don't, but it is something that we're working on, and maybe even us being able to displace some of our employees over that year. So with the shuttle, so hopefully it relieves some of the other pieces. We should probably though have more of a conversation of the 2 businesses that are represented here, and then the third one being really others, offline, and discuss more of that.
Or we didn't have to, is the doctors over there that I'm not the doctors, but they're employees that come and park, and they're here 8 hours a day. Again, maybe make it beneficial for them to shuttle them from wherever you shuttle them from, and tag them like he's saying, tag them so that your runaround guy knows that they should be somewhere else instead of right in front of our small businesses, 8 hours, 9 hours a day. It's killing us.
With the physician offices, we don't have as much control, but it is something, we're meeting with them today at noon to try to share the same plan so that they have an idea, but also to offer some of those pieces. So if we're shuttling some of our employees, can we shuttle some of theirs at the same time? So it's, you're on the same wavelength of what we're thinking. We can't though tell the physician offices they can't be in here, because many of them would say, hey, we've been a part of the parking district since 1970 such and such. And so realistically, we have to be able to figure out and work with them. That is why we're having this every week. So it's a good idea. Yeah.
Question here?
What happens to Old Cabrillo Street?
That is likely becoming Hospital Way, I think is the new street name for that.
Do you mean the name of it, or do you mean what's taking place?
Since there's gonna be a new Cabrillo, what happens to the old
So both streets, so think of the street that comes in next to
Right next
Yolanda's.
to our building.
It will actually run right in front of the emergency department. And the other street that comes right through this building will meet up. So there's truly more of a circulation that could go right past the front of the hospital and past the front of the emergency department, right next to Yolanda's. So that remains a street to come in. So there are two entrances off Main Street versus just a replacement and shutting that one down.
Yeah, that street is not, the street itself is not going, the names may change, but the street remains.
Technically speaking, our property has become a street. And we didn't really sign up for that, but they
Yeah.
fly through there, we had to put some speed bumps in it before somebody got killed. And there probably should be some stop sign there too.
Yeah. It also, and I think that as Jeff pointed out, we think, having tried to observe as you had kind of invited us to take a look at that, we think that part of that is because of the bulb out on Borchard, that individuals struggle with that turn on Borchard, so they just cut through the parking lot of Yolanda. So I agree with you, we need to come up with some street signs and some stop signs and how we approach that and change, the city's looking at a different plan on the bulb out.
Do we have a closure?
We should, maybe you could, yeah.
You have a what?
A toll gate.
Oh.
Another thing, because of Orchard, more trucks have figured out how it's a lot easier to go down the Cabrillo and be right behind our operation, especially larger trucks. But even Bobtail cars,
With that corner, with the bulb outs, yeah.
so it's becoming a little bit of a problem back there.
I think we're monitoring those, trying to keep.
Yeah,
Camera pointed out.
I have lots of detailed questions, but more on the process today. It's not going to council in this court.
It's on the agenda because we continue to a date certain, but we're going to have a one-page memo, one sentence memo that says we're moving it to October 13th.
Okay, so they're not going to take any action to discuss it?
They won't.
I guess the broad-based question, because there are so many details yet to be worked out. We own a property next door, and we have plans to redevelop it. And obviously, there's not enough parking on site, so we're going to have to negotiate or whatnot and think about how to get some of those parking spaces allocated to ours and go through all the same discussion. And I guess the feeling would be, when it goes to city council on October 13th, the ground lease, the environmental, and the MOU, then once they're adopted, that's pretty much the end of the process legally. You can't go back then, and I love the notion of having good intentions and wanting to say, well, we have no desire to provide paid parking now, we have no intention to provide paid parking. On the other hand, every single legal agreement gives CMH the absolute sole discretion to pretty much do whatever CMH decides they need to do in the future. That's a little bit unnerving, especially from a property owner standpoint, from our tenant standpoint as well. So I say that, and I sort of pose it as a question, put yourself in our shoes. Is there something, some way that can be done to alleviate the nervousness from the merchants, all the great ideas, our nervousness as well, and incorporate them into that ground lease or the MOU? And I mean, you know where I'm heading.
Are you talking about the paid parking part or the other?
No, I'm talking about in general. I mean, from our position, and you didn't have time or whatnot to get into the notion of allocating those spaces in the parking garage to each one's property. I think,
Because we're unallocating them.
okay, well, that's new from.
You're right, we've changed
Okay.
that, yes.
All right,
Yeah.
so
That's
that,
based on some feedback, we're unallocating them.
All right.
It is a first come, first served, based on the parking agreement from the city and the lease with CNH.
that's huge.
Yeah, based on entitlement
Right,
process.
so that's new.
Yeah.
But the city, or CMH still has, and now I have to look at the numbers because I had them all sort of calculated
I
out.
put these back up just to,
Yeah.
I brought this slide back up
Yeah.
just to show those.
So there's some that was allocated to the various developers who are out there, and then there was another magic 101 number of spaces that CMH could allocate as well. And some of that is just, it's being in that position where it's not clearly called out and again, because it's parking District 3, and because the property owners paid to purchase the land initially, and Brandon CMH is going to have incredible economic development impact, but as property owners, we put ourselves in a position where we'd like to see more assurance that the things in the future that are good intentions are really actually going to happen.
Well, let me describe the first point, okay? In fact, let's go back to what our decision process was. Originally, the plan was we could take this building down and do surface lot, take the next building down and do surface lot, take another building down and do surface lot, and what we've created is completely the antithesis of what we started 5 years ago, right? So we own the property here. In theory, we could get, I don't know, 60, 80 spots, tear the building down, build a surface lot. So option one. And so we went and looked, and that's frankly the cheapest for us. So the path of least resistance, great, let's create more surface lot in this area. That does not, it's not consistent with what the overall goal is in this area. And two, frankly, it's not the right thing for the community.
Right.
We've solved our problem, we haven't solved anybody else's problem, and we haven't planned for the future. So second option that we look at is we go and say, let's build just a lot of parking structure that we need. We need 200 spaces. We need to replace 100. We'll build a partial. So just, again, full disclosure, Sid, is we looked at 571 spaces. It wasn't always 571. It was, let's build 250
Yeah,
or
Adam,
300.
I went to every public meeting that you guys had that we were invited to, and I got the history total. So I'm right there with you. I know.
So let me finish the thought though, okay, and you used it in Tanny, but the 571 spaces, we felt we would go ahead and we talked to the city, we'll go ahead and just build 250, the ones that the hospital needs. And then at a later date, when other business owners decide and others, maybe the hospital decides we need another 250, 300 spaces, add on at that time. And you guys, city, you guys figure out how you want to do it. If you want to pay for that, great. If you don't, then we've got what we need essentially. So, and again, I'm just trying to describe the process. Next step is we say, again, that achieves part of it, but it doesn't solve the problem really for what is going on in the community, and it doesn't plan for the future of what all of us would like to see, opportunities to develop in your property and in other properties in different areas. So what can we do? So we talk to the city and say, can we partner with the city? Well, the city's been gracious in partnering, but reality is the city does not have an extra $5 million that we can tap into, right? And we're building a $285 million facility, and so we're a little tapped out too. And saying that, we're in the process of saying, okay, we've got to build something to plan for the future. Let's build it all at once because it's more cost effective to do it now. Plan for the future, allow for that. So your question is, what could allow for me more reassurance? If somebody wants to say, great, we'll pay for the other half, okay, that's one option, I guess. We could always consider that, but it didn't make sense to prolong the decision and wait until the city was able, and in speaking very kindly, the city has, we've tried to work closely with them and with the businesses, but it didn't make sense to ask the city 3 years from now to allow for that. You move into a new hospital, now there's more congestion, and now we have to create more problems to try to build a parking structure at that time. So I'm not, in no way am I trying to cry on your shoulder. I'm trying to describe our thought process. So from your thought process, how can we allow for more reassurance? What we've tried to say is, here's 200 spaces that we don't know what they're going to be used for. We don't know if businesses from the development, we don't know if the hospital has some, we don't know, but we are willing to make the investment up front of the $11 to $12 million versus 5.
Right, well,
So,
you have a couple of options there. Number one is 200 spaces can have more definition, and that alleviates some of our nervousness. Number two, you talk about building on 2 more levels and finding somebody else to actually do it. I don't think that opportunity was ever put out publicly, and that's where the transparency sort of failed to sort of bring the project forward. It could have been, for instance, a public project, and it could have gone out to bid.
Okay.
I guess the problem is that.
So pause on that. What's the time frame that typically takes? Can that happen in a 1-year time frame?
Well, if somebody had thought about it at first read,
We
which
thought,
it was.
and then we discussed. and
Which
said
it was
six
discussed.
months, yeah.
Well, let me ask you.
And I don't want to take the time here at this meeting to go in, because we can
Well,
talk.
no, I actually just want to ask a question. So you talked about more, I think the word more specificity, I can't say the word.
Yes,
On the 199 spaces. What does that mean? What more do you
Well,
want?
I would, from the standpoint of parking District 3, I mean, the
Those are
hospital-
not parking district 3, those are above and beyond parking district 3.
Right, but they're going on parking District 3 property,
Uh-huh.
all right, which belongs to all of the property owners in the area,
Which is being replaced.
which is being replaced.
Even the ones
Absolutely
that
right.
were already taken
Absolutely
out.
right. But in dealing with the city, and, I know the notion of economic development, we're dealing with other projects around the city. The city has the leverage, because they own the land, to better define how those 199 spaces may be used in the future. The nervousness comes from, I know CMH are all good guys, but if you have all the control, and the city, even underpaid parking, has to come to you and talk about an approval process, and you have the final say, I think that's sort of the sticking point that makes us feel uncomfortable. Maybe if it's a more collaborative process, maybe if there are more people at the table, and these are just guesses, maybe if there's a parking District 3 commission that has the property owners and the rest of the area in mind and protected, love you guys, but just having it CMH only, again, it's a little bit under.
I did want to address one thing. In the original memorandum of understanding, which was adopted by City Council in 2010, that was on one of the early slides. So the MOU talked about that either the city or CMH was going to build this parking structure. So that's been known since 2010 when that was adopted. So I know the notion of this going out to bid or something in terms of building those additional 2 stories, that was decided 4 years ago when the MOU was approved, that one of these 2 entities was going to build the structure. The good news, frankly, don't listen. The good news for us is that they've stepped up to do it in terms of spending the 11 to 12 million. So it always contemplated one of the 2 parties doing it. It said if they're going to do it, it's going to be built here. If the city does it, then it's going to be built here or nearby. But obviously, given that we have the land here, this would be.
Yeah, Brian, and the last point, that thing flipped flopped back and forth a couple of times. The first MOU had the city, it was all over the map. But no matter how you structure this project, it's still a public garage on public property, whereby these folks in this room, us especially, this is all vested self-interest because we own the property next door. We want to make certain that we have in the future some right to those spaces that's, again, better defined, and I don't have the answer today, but those are the details. And so, I'm being as transparent from
I
our
appreciate that.
position as you are.
I think from a city perspective, and this goes to all the property owners, it's pretty clear that individual property owners, to redevelop their property in any meaningful way, right now you'd have to find your own park. If this parking structure wasn't happening, the answer probably you would never get there. Because to solve parking on site would be impossible for individual properties. So the city's interest here, and the reason we're getting $10 in rent instead of something higher, is because the other value we're getting is the potential of development on Main Street that wouldn't happen without the structure. I mean, we're very deliberate here. The reason that this structure makes sense to the city, and we've described that in all the staff reports to the city council, and I'll send them to you, is without the structure happening in the way CMH has proposed it and that we worked on it, all we get is CMH, which is a good thing, but we wouldn't get any of that additional opportunity. We think this is a way of solving the parking challenge that you all have, should you want to develop. You don't have to, but if you want to, this is the way of delivering a parking answer that you wouldn't otherwise be able to create.
And Jeff, just to follow on that, we've been incredibly supportive, and even going to DRC, this parking structure makes perfect sense. I've gone to all the meetings when Gary decided there was only going to be 3, and said, this is all we need is 3 stories on a parking structure. I said, that's idiotic, you got to go 5. So we did that, and we supported it fully. And then all of a sudden, the ground lease came in front of City Council. We got a copy on Friday, Monday night, it was to be decided. And we got a little bit crazy in seeing that for the first time. And that's the notion. Parking structure, great. the arrangement, the devil's in the details. And it's not a situation of mistrust, it's just a situation of wanting to know exactly where our position is.
So I think that's where Brian, as he pointed out, that with feedback, went back and they tried to readjust rather than having a
Yes.
specific allocation. It was more of a first come, first served, because one property may decide they never want to redevelop, and others may decide they need more.
Absolutely.
So,
And it's a good start. I grant you, it's a good start, but trying to figure, you know, I want to be in a position where we can feel comfortable October 13th and say, you know, this makes sense for us as property owners and our tenants as well.
So we're here, and we would love your thoughts, whether it's today or between now and October 13th or thereafter. Would love some of the thinking about that. That would be done in an equitable way, and would be also done based on kind of an investment that we're trying to make of $11 to $12 million as to how that's shared in the future in a very fair way.
Yeah, and so everybody understands, I mean, I understand you're making an investment of $11 to $12 million, but you're also then in a position where you can sublease or sell to the property owners who want to redevelop
Sure.
at some unknown cost.
Fair market value.
Well,
Well, actually, let me jump in on
Okay,
that.
okay,
Because
go ahead.
I know you touched on it earlier, but let me just go back to it one more time. So, we didn't want it to be just some completely unknown number that you get an entitlement from the city and you've got an offsite parking agreement, and now now you go to CMH and it's whatever they decide. So, some of the detail that is in that lease has basically an allocation of costs on a per stall basis to build this. And of course, there's ongoing maintenance costs. So, because the parking structure hasn't been built, the final numbers are not known. The final numbers will be plugged into a cost plan that we've put in the lease, and those numbers will then be used to generate what would be the rent.
I understand the intent,
There's details in terms of leases.
Yeah, and I really want to get to other people who understand, so.
But again, following my same theme, that ground lease, and yes, Brian, it contains the intention, but it doesn't contain the details on how much cost goes where, and that's just good business. So maybe you beef up with that.
So any other property owners? I want to ask other property owners first. So anybody else have questions? Did I see a hand over here? Any other property owners have questions? Yeah.
Well, the one thing that kind of catches my ear is we used to have ample parking right outside our back door, which is now a building.
Right.
I guess my concern is we might be forced to lease some space at some given time in the future. When we bought this property 33 years ago, we had all the parking we needed right at our back door. Now we're going to have to potentially lease it. That makes us nervous.
That would only be if you were going to expand.
Well, that's the problem. We're in a situation right now where we want to completely rebuild our business, but we don't want to put a dime into it with all the unknowns. That's the problem. We are ready to pull the trigger right now on completely revamping our business, but we don't want to do that because we don't know what's going to happen. We're really in a really tight position.
I'm sorry, you don't know what's going to happen in relation to the parking structure,
How it's gonna
possible
live
business.
next year.
Kind of all of it. You know, we have a freeway going through our property now. This is property that we own, and now it's become an easement for the whole city. That's not cool.
I agree, and we've actually asked our traffic folks, I know Stahl is doing their own video cameras, we've seen what's happening, but we've asked our traffic folks to take a look at that and see if there's traffic controls that would actually help that. And as I said, I think the real reason that that's happening is our fault. Because to be honest, the city created Ball Road, required CMH to create these bulkheads and orchards that are creating a workaround. People are avoiding orchard at all costs because it's such a convoluted way of driving through there. And so I think you're being impacted by that, probably more than anything else as far as that cut-through traffic. And we realize we have to fix that.
We're a high-traffic business.
Yeah.
If we don't get cars in, we need 40 to 60 spots just to fill our restaurant.
Right.
I don't even know where our customers are parking right now. It's painful.
And I think you said it. So I think we had CMH add the public parking sign on the parking structure a year or so ago. sounds like that works if the barrier is removed at night, and it isn't always removed at night. Is that what you're saying? So hopefully, we can be better at that those spaces could be more
Yeah,
accessible.
a
to
little bit,
your customers.
and make sure,
Yeah.
it shouldn't, that barrier shouldn't be
Should be
there
gone.
after 5 o'clock. But even then, that hasn't solved, that is a key piece that you're saying, and it sounds like we're trying to do that traffic study and understand who's going through there and why, and what we can do to change that.
Because obviously, if your lawn is interested in renovating, we'd be happy to have you do that, but understand uncertainties, giving you some pieces.
That's what we're leaning towards renovating, but we're very gun shy. Well,
And, yeah, uncertain.
and the problem is that if you look at the video, you'll see that 95% of the cars that are traveling on our property are not Galavis customers.
And is
They're
your,
just driving through.
is your parking challenge, there's the cut-through traffic, is your parking issue mostly at lunch or daytime, nighttime?
I would say primarily at lunch, but it affects us. You know, if you have senior citizens that are patronizing our restaurant,
Yeah.
they're not gonna walk a quarter mile to go eat at our restaurant, so it's impacting us.
Yeah.
Yes, is CMH planning on taking any properties in the area via eminent domain?
No. And nor are we. We don't take it. They wouldn't. Yeah, they don't have the power and we wouldn't do the change.
Perfect follow-up to what this gentleman said. You know, as the state laws change, you know, there could be a requirement, very realistic, that the existing property owners and the businesses are going to be required to have more parking through various changes in state law and things of that nature. What sort of, for example, if you have a 1,000-square-foot building in 2014, you may require 13 spaces, but we don't know what's going to be happening.
State's not gonna change that.
But if it does, but we've
But they're
created
not.
a
That's not right.
situation where the property owner is going to have to enter into a lease with CMH in order to preserve its property or else perhaps face inverse condemnation.
That's very unlucky. The state's gonna make us, I mean.
But this is a 50-year lease,
I know,
and
but-
that's the
yeah.
issue, is that when I'm dead,
If the state does anything, frankly, it's gonna require less parking, because that's the state's goal, is less driving. The state's not gonna require businesses to require them to have more parking spaces.
So is your
That's
concern, let me
right.
see if I understand, just to restate it, is that if the state changes the law,
Or the
changes
city.
the requirements, or the city, and would say 1,000-foot office or space needs to have X plus 2 or X plus 3.
Right.
Then your concern is that you would be forced into purchasing or finding some other parking.
right, and what I'm talking about is to have something written in the lease where CMH would agree that in that kind of a scenario, they would, at fair market value, make them available. Because if you could, like, as Sid was indicating, you could wind up with a captive situation where in order to keep the building, they have to lease the property, lease these spots, and not you, but your successor who doesn't have your same ethics and morale would say, you know what, guy, we have you over a barrel, why don't you pay us a little bit more than what fair market value would be? And this isn't you, it's the people that we don't know, and
It
it's
could
not
be the
Jeff.
next generation or the generation after that.
It's because it's
How do you
such a
protect the
long lease. You know, this was 5 years, I wouldn't be talking about this, but it's so long. 50 years ago, there weren't the cars that are out here.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where I'm coming from, since it's such a.
We actually reduced it to 50 plus 210. Yeah.
Yeah, not that it's gonna affect anything of us,
No,
but
no,
it was
that's
reduced,
good.
yeah, and tried to make.
When it went to council, it was 100 years, so now I can cut my
I think,
anxiety in half.
I think, James, the likely scenario that would generate that is the owner of the former Quest tenant space here. No. So that building's vacant, right? And if somebody came in and said, I want to occupy that as a restaurant, and they're going to intensify, same building space.
Right.
They're going to intensify the use, and we're going to say, well, instead of the 8 spaces you're required to have, it's a restaurant, you need 20.
Right.
That's the scenario that would happen. That's not state imposing, it's the
Right.
property owner intensifying the use. And they would have to find those spaces somewhere, and that's the scenario you're trying to get.
Yeah,
More likely, yeah.
Again, the idea is almost the reverse. It's to try to create a mechanism that allows for intensification of use. Right?
Yeah.
It allows something that's built in for this next
And
century.
there can only be so many spaces, and there's the allocation.
Right.
Yeah, but Brian, I mean, it just, and again, I apologize for getting into the weeds, but if we look at constructing residential which makes a boatload of money in this marketplace, we need X number of spaces. If we don't get those spaces and we have to reduce to a lesser use, office space, whatever it is, that's not marketable, it affects the economics from our standpoint. And we could be in a position where we just can't do anything because the market isn't there for it. And we want to know and be protected that we'll have some way to work with the hospital where we're not basically held hostage, because when they say no, the value of our property goes down.
Well, they don't get to ask them a question until we say yes, as part of the entitlement process. We have to approve it and say, X spaces are required off-site, and we're gonna allow you to do those off-site spaces.
You know which one might be a good thought? Maybe you reverse it somehow. You know, or maybe when you say yes, they have to say yes. Because it's the end game. Going through the city process we're doing right now, and that's a great deal, but at the end of the day, you know, we're still held to the CMH.
Sorry, Leanne,
Thanks. I'm hearing the word transparency, and I'm hearing that you're open to discussion. So since there's obviously concern about the number of allocated spaces for future development, could the discussions occur now that there could be contribution to say another level, whether it be subterranean, partially subterranean, another level on the upper level, and pay for those costs and strike a development agreement now so that that can relieve some of that?
Well, we'd have to start over on the hospital, on the parking structure approvals, because those are already done, through the planning commission. So we'd have to come in with a new plan that would have a higher level, a lower level, and go back through the approval process. The downside there is we do have a goal of having the structure open by the time CMH opens in a year and a half.
Yeah, ultimately, I'll just say, you know, again, from our perspective, we'd like to have the parking structure built as were before the new hospital opens, because it does, otherwise you go from the new hospital, then you have to go into tearing out all the parking. It just doesn't fit as well.
Because you guys have talked about previously building what you need and then potentially in the future building more. So isn't that sort of in that same vein, except maybe accelerating that process?
Well, that's what we try to do, is to maximize that parking structure based on capacity, based on all the pieces, so we would build the maximum piece. Now, I don't like to be.
I don't think we're gonna go higher than what's there. I was already concerned about the visibility of the structure. The commission asked for view from 5 points. And you saw that view. So I wanna, so we have, I know three of you are talking a lot all from the same property representative. So we can have a separate conversation. I just don't wanna monopolize for anybody else. And I know we're hitting our 1 year, 1 hour time frame. Feels like a year. Any other property owners? Yeah, a couple over here.
Yeah, it has no effect on current allocations in the parking district?
No, that's the 172 that get replaced in the structure. Yes.
I have one more quick question. You ran by the number of 172 public parking places.
Right.
And then somewhere along in your little figures there, you went to 113 parking.
I'm sorry, 113 was in the old parking structure.
Oh, okay.
The existing.
I didn't
I'm sorry. It's to identify specifically the number of public parking spaces in the existing parking structure. It used to be identified by location on a map. Now, as part of the update, we're specifically identifying the numbers.
Oh, I see, okay.
And just so you know, I know you're all taking notes. We can, if you signed in and gave us your email address, we'll email you a copy of this, so you have the record of it.
And the other numbers related to the new structure I've got on the screen right now.
Was there one in the back somewhere? Another question?
I've got on the way back, no.
No.
I got 172 spaces
One.
is the identification of all spaces that were displaced because of the construction. So even this triangular lot over by Yolanda's and some of the others, and where the park's going, if you add all those up, and that net component is 172 spaces. It's more than what's sitting out there right now, but it's the overall effect of what's going on. That we agreed to check the place.
One more
All right,
set.
last one. So you're saying you'd have to go all the way back through the approval process. And I guess that's what I'm not understanding, because the planning commission and DRC has approved the design. The design is lovely, and that's all good to go. The ground lease is the problem. That's the document that governs how this deal is going to be structured in the future. I guess I'm not seeing, unless you're going back to the ordinances and parking
If
district.
you're asking us to go back and do subterranean level, that
No,
changes
no,
engineering,
no, no, no.
structural and everything.
No,
That's
no.
what
That's what Leon
No,
asked for.
I know that's what he was talking about, but I already got the answer to that, and it's no, and that's fine.
Okay.
But again, if you're just going back and just looking at the ground base, and I'll ask the question this way, as I would understand it, does that require you to go all the way back to the planning commission?
No, I was answering Leon's question.
That was my next question.
Yeah, the
Got it.
ground lease doesn't even go to the planning commission, it only goes to the city council.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep the
Yeah.
process straight.
Yeah.
Yeah, only if structurally, going back and doing the subterranean and changing the foundation and changing that overall piece, changes the plan dramatically and where
Yes.
structurally, we'd be able to build.
Yeah, got it.
Not the other thing.
Let me say, I know we're sort of wrapping up. I want to say, first of all, thank you for all for coming. It's really important that the property owners in this district are actively involved. I'm glad we decided to invite you here. I think we all have a goal, when we say the wellness district, of really capitalizing on this investment and seeing other investment happen around CMH. You're the ones that are going to help us deliver that. So we really want to continue to be partners with you and communicate with you. So we will probably send you a couple emails just between now and October 13th, just to make sure we all know what's going on. We'll send you this PowerPoint presentation. We'll send you the link to the city council meeting when all the latest documents are there. And I gave some of my cards out. I'm happy to take phone calls from any of you. Brian's the day-to-day project
Is
manager.
it even fair to say,
Adam's
Jeff, Luke, is it?
Yes.
Who's doing the filming? I mean, if you want a copy, I don't know. If you said-
Buy it from me.
Well, you'll have to negotiate it away
Yeah.
from.
You can,
Yeah.
you can all negotiate.
But the point being is,
But I mean-
we're happy to share anything and everything. We'll have this information.
And if any of you are thinking about, you're here because you're kind of thinking about the future of your property and you want to sit down and talk about what that, practically how this would all happen, happy to do that. So let us know, we'll be happy to do that.
And just, one suggestion, that's a great reach out, but I would consider, if you're gonna do that, to have a bunch of property owners together. Doing it one-on-one with individual property owners just isn't as effective as.
It's sort of up to the
putting us all
property
in
owners.
groups.
Yeah, it's up to individuals want to do it themselves.
And
We'll
maybe
do
you guys
it.
wanna organize it. I don't know.
If you would like another one of these meetings, we're happy to do that.
Yeah.
If that's within a month's time or 2 months' time or a week's time, you tell us. Again, the process, we would love to be able to continue and address any of the concerns. And we may see eye to eye on everything, or we may not, but at least let's have that conversation, right? So if you're interested in it, we're happy to pull everyone back together.
And if I didn't give you my card, if you go to the city's website under community development, you can click on my name and email me directly.
And mine are up here by the sign-in sheet that we got. Feel free to take
What
that.
will the new information be on?
It will be
Just
out
to-
the Wednesday
Just
before.
to thank you as well. The city was thanking, we really appreciate, we know that the construction is painful, we appreciate the flexibility, we appreciate you working with us. And if there's anything we can have one-on-one conversations with, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.